Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel, and yes, that goes double for you guys who've actually moved over to Spotify and Apple's podcasting platform in order to view the audio-only version of this show. Today we're going to be discussing HBO's new semi-hit, critically acclaimed, sort of, but not as much as the original Game of Thrones series, House of the Dragon, and why, despite the fact that I actually find the show to be interesting and compelling, it's not going to save HBO and likely will be the end of HBO. But before we get into that, we need to talk about our sponsor, so I will toss it to the sponsor, like that. I'm gonna fling it like that. And then we'll bring it back over here and discuss it on the other side. Do you have a plan for an earthquake? What about a severe weather event? What about a situation where your power goes out, like what happened when the frost hit the state of Texas? Well, you definitely should, because what we've seen time and time again is that the unprepared get left behind and those who thought ahead end up prospering. And in light of that reality, this is one of the reasons why I'm so happy to be partnering with GetASurvivalKit.com. This backpack is compact, easy to store in your car or in the front of your property, so you can grab it and go in a crisis situation. It has all the supplies that you'll need in order to make it through the first 72 hours, including food. They got a big ration brick in here, medical supplies, first aid kit, and lighting so you can actually see where you're going if the power goes out. And again, easy to store, compact, and great. And one of the best things about this is that if you're a listener to this show, if you're a viewer, if you're anybody who watches this and you go to getasurvivalkit.com, you can get this for 50% off. That's 50% off, and it gives you peace of mind. Cannot beat that deal. So, House of the Dragon is out. A lot of people are calling it Hot D. I will not be doing so because this is a 10,000 IQ, very mature show, and the show is pretty decent. It's about what I expected from the source material that it's actually based on, and from the fact that Martin is involved, and HBO seems to be trying to not end up in a situation like they did with the original Game of Thrones series. The acting's on point, the costumes, some of them just look fantastic. The new Kingsguard armor, amazing in every possible way, and I know a lot of people are going to say, well, this is a prequel to the original, how is the Kingsguard armor so much nicer under this past reign rather than this future reign? But whatever, it's actually more accurate to the book, just like the throne is more accurate to the book, and I do appreciate it for that. However, that does not mean that there aren't flaws in the show, that does not mean that there aren't issues in the show, and that does not mean that even if this show gets a lot better, which it would need to in order to equal the first 4 seasons of the original Game of Thrones, that it will be enough to save HBO Max. Now, one of the things that I want to address, because I've talked about it in a previous video discussing House of the Dragon, is Corlys Velaryon and House Velaryon. Obviously, this is a race swap of a character in order to introduce more diversity into the show. Specifically, they made the house black when this house is supposed to look white. They're supposed to actually look exactly like the Targaryens. And a lot of people talked about this, and a lot of people said, hey, look, this is clearly and obviously a diversity push, and I made a video about it, and I discussed how it was in fact a diversity push. But if you think about the history of House Velaryon, since they were Valyrians, but they weren't Dragon Lords, they were actually a seafaring house, and they would have traveled the world, it would make sense for them to be more mixed up than the primary house, House Targaryen, aka the Dragon Lords. Now, I said this as in it was an intelligent house to swap if you were going to swap one for diversity purposes, and obviously it was done for diversity purposes. Obviously, House Velaryon was meant to look like the Targaryens, and thus would have not fit this if you did a straight-up adaptation, but this was the premise of that video, and some people have been saying, oh, that aged poorly, because there's an interview from the showrunners where they basically said the reason they made this guy black is because they wanted the show to not be too white. They didn't want you to be watching too many white people and all these other woke social justice reasons that honestly I just don't understand why the showrunners would go in that direction and actually say that. Look, if you don't know, black people care more about race than any other group of people in the United States of America. They will not see movies unless they feature black people, on average, more than any other group in the United States of America. So obviously, one of the things that Hollywood does in order to tap that portion of the audience is change characters or add in characters that happen to be black in order to rope in some of the black audience. So we all knew on the surface that this is why this guy was cast. However, if you're a showrunner, if you're a director, if you're a writer, if you're somebody behind the scenes, you should never say that you're doing this and you're basically casting this person as a token. You should just say, hey, look, I'm bringing this guy in because he read for the part and he nailed it, and then we changed the house so that they could match him better. Just say he's the best man for the job. We'll all know, anybody who's paying attention to trends and the economics around specifically black people as compared to any other group, and watching a show or watching the movies why you're doing this, but we would accept it better if you didn't just throw it in the face of the fans and make it so weird for the actor, in my opinion, because if I were a black actor, I would feel really strange or really weirded out by the fact that the first thing that they said that they were looking for was a black person, and it wasn't because I read for the part and I nailed it. But whatever, that bridge is lost. We already crossed it. We can only judge the product for what it is right now, and as of right now, the Corlys Valerian actor, pretty decent in the show, and if you know what happens to this character, you know that maybe he's not going to be that big of a deal for that long. Also, I've noticed that there's a lot of people on the internet.com, specifically in the more left-leaning YouTube reviewers, kind of overpraising him in order to compensate for the fact that people noticed that this was a recast. This is embarrassing. This is shameful. The guy's actually a good actor. He delivers the dialogue well. He has some charisma to him, but he hasn't done all that much in the show, so the overpraise is a bit absurd. And also, I did make this point before, and I will make it again. The original Stark children were all wrong in the original series. All of the Stark children, except for Jon Snow and except for Arya, were meant to look more like Catelyn. They were meant to have red hair. This was crucial to the story because one of the reasons why Catelyn Stark hated Jon Snow so much is that he looked just like Ned Stark, and she didn't have any legitimate children, any legitimate male children that actually looked like Ned Stark. So she saw the bastard as a threat, because throughout history, bastards have been threats because they don't have inheritance and they're often jealous of that, and this was changed for the show and nobody seemed to notice. On top of that, the wife of Corlys Valerian is actually supposed to be the child of a Baratheon and a Targaryen, and you will notice that she has the white hair like she did in the original source material for this, that was later changed once George R.R. Martin remembered that this actually produces a giant plot hole, a giant contradiction in the narrative with the whole "the seed is strong" thing. Now, we know for a fact why Corlys Valerian was cast as a black person. It was to fill diversity quotas. It was to bring in the black audience. For all of those reasons, we all understand that. And I'm willing to grant that the original Stark children were cast because they were best suited for the part, and they really didn't think that they were going to focus that much on Jon Snow's bastard nature, because unlike the books, you're filming from an objective perspective. You're not actually in Catelyn Stark's head, so it wouldn't matter as much. But there's actually no excuse for this woman to have the fake white hair wig when the whole thing about the seed is strong is so crucial, not only in the books, but in the first season of Game of Thrones. Ned Stark's whole premise for suspecting Jaime and Cersei having all the kids without Robert is the fact that he looked through the Baratheon genealogy and found that every single time somebody with Baratheon blood mixed with somebody, they ended up with black of hair and blue eyes. So this is what we call a narrative contradiction, which is far more egregious than what we already know externally is happening around the show. But setting all of that aside, the show's alright. The actors that I've seen in the first 2 episodes are actually pretty good. I actually haven't seen the older versions of 2 characters that are aged up in a future part of the narrative, so that remains to be seen. But overall, they seem to be nailing it. Obviously, there's money in the show. Obviously, everything looks fantastic. But one of the main issues that I have with this series is directorial choices and writing choices. The show has pacing problems. The show slows down to a grinding halt, gets incredibly boring, and there's really no excuse for that. The pilot of the show is pretty bad in this regard. I would say that probably the first 20, maybe even 30 minutes of this series are incredibly boring. They're not entertaining, and the thing is, these problems could have been fixed if you just restructured the order of some of the scenes. If they were to open the show up with Daemon Targaryen being named the leader of the City Watch, and then all the things that he did to the criminals, which, by the way, we need Daemon Targaryen as the chief of police or as the prosecutors in our society right now today, with all these criminals running wild, then that would have roped people in a lot more, and it would have been a better way to introduce Daemon Targaryen as this rogue prince character that he's presented to be. Rather than that, we get an opening that has text, and the text alludes to the original Game of Thrones series, letting you know that this takes place X amount of years for the original Game of Thrones series. And by the way, I'm going to steal this from the nerds that actually focus in on all these grubby details way more than I do, but it turns out that it doesn't take place before that many years before the Game of Thrones series. If you did the math, calculated it out, in reality, the scene takes place that many years before Daenerys Targaryen is born, and since the series doesn't start with baby Dany Targaryen, therefore, That's nonsensical. And on that note, which of course is references to the original series, this needs to stop. It needs to not exist. I'm tired of the member berries, the flashing to different locations that were in the universe. Totally fine, totally acceptable, totally understandable. It takes place in the same world, so if you're visiting places, do so with a purpose. But the whole thing at the end of the first episode, which I will dub the worst scene in the entire series, and probably will remain the worst scene in the entire series, about how we need to keep this in line because of the prince that was promised, and oh, we gotta fight against the White Walkers, and oh, also, what we're gonna call this prophecy is the Song of Ice and Fire, which, aka, if you guys don't know about it, is the name of the book series. Remember the book series? Remember the White Walkers? We need a Targaryen on the Iron Throne for the White Walkers. You remember that? This is stupid for a number of reasons. First and foremost, the original show's creators ruined the White Walker storyline. The plot was resolved in an unsatisfactory way, so calling back to that and setting up for that is totally unnecessary and totally nonsensical because A, we've already seen it, and B, we hate it. Secondly, memberberry moments are the worst thing that exists in media, and it's just disgusting to see it in this slickly made HBO series. Fourthly, or thirdly, I don't even care because I already lost track of my own count. It's completely wrong. During the prophecy that he gave to this girl, he says, we need the whole realm to unite against the threat from the north, aka the White Walkers, which was not true. The whole realm was not united. It was just the north and Daenerys Targaryen and some Dothraki. And 3, he said that we needed to have Dany Targaryen or a Targaryen sitting the Iron Throne in order to do so. This was also not true. It was completely false. Turns out all you need is Arya jumping off a trampoline and screaming, and you can wipe out the entire White Walker thread. So you're setting up for something that we've already seen that sucked so badly, that was so horrible, and it's not even a true setup. You're trying to throw out this prophecy and all that was thrown away by the showrunners originally. They had to retcon a line in order to make it work, and I don't care for it. And the idea that we're putting so much emphasis on the stupid Dragonbone dagger is absurd. The Dragonbone dagger was a plot hole in the original Game of Thrones books that carried over to the show and is now plaguing this show. The dagger was not meant to be that significant. Martin didn't start noting the significance of these Valyrian steel daggers until later on, so yeah, not a great plan. Now that being said, I know I've been kind of negative about the show. Overall, I'm kind of into what's going on, and I would love to see how it develops over the course of the 10 episodes. Now, one of the problems with House of the Dragon is that it's based on very thin source material, but since you got Martin there, maybe he could punch it up in order to make it a satisfying story. Who knows, who knows? And maybe they'll cut down on the member berries a little bit later on. The guy who plays Daemon Targaryen, actually really good in the role, really draws you in, and I was put off by the fact that he was a weird looking guy and he's supposed to be this ultra handsome guy. He was clearly chosen for his acting ability and for his charisma, and he really ropes you in and creeps you out. So that is all to the good. I also like the girls in the show, and I like the original king, or the king at the start of this story, or not even the king at the start of the story, because the story starts with the stupid flashback. The one who's the king right now, totally into it, and all the other ancillary characters seem to be working. Also, this man is discount Tywin Lannister. You know it, I know it, everybody knows it, and this is largely due to the fact that the bulk of this story was meant to be like a parallel, a mirror to what's going on in the Song of Ice and Fire book series, so expect to see a lot of that. So if your question is, would I recommend House of the Dragon at this point, as of episode 2, I definitely would. It's something to check out, it's something to be interested in, and the people who ruined the original Game of Thrones aren't around, and also, it's not as good as the original Game of Thrones, so unless it gets built up significantly further, you won't have to see such a dramatic fall. However, what this video is also about is the trouble that HBO Max is in, because as interesting as House of the Dragon is, it is not saving the streaming service. Now, we all know that Discovery ended up buying Warner Media or HBO, whatever combination of things. Honestly, all these mergers, too much, and they're looking to change up things in order to make them work. I'm sure you guys have heard about the Batgirl movie being totally scrapped, being canned, being thrown in the garbage, and this is the signs of a shakeup happening around at the company. And one of the reasons why they want to do a shakeup is because HBO Max is not doing so well. Even though HBO is known typically for quality shows, quality programming, and Warner Brothers' archive of movies, films, and characters is pretty dense, their streaming service is underperforming. And by the way, remember, Warner Brothers was the studio that did direct-to-streaming releases of all their major blockbusters during the course of the pandemic, and this has not juiced the numbers. So we're looking at huge problems for HBO Max. So obviously, one of the things that they're trying to do is what every other company is doing, which is create a universe, and they're trying to do that with Game of Thrones. And this is one of the reasons why not only House of the Dragon is being greenlit, but we're also hearing setups for the Nymeria Thousand Ships and other shows that might exist in the universe. So what we're going to see is there's going to be a lot of pressure put on this show in order to rope in subscribers to watch this show, when in reality, it's just not going to work out that way. This is only going to be a 10-episode series, and Game of Thrones is not Marvel. You're not going to be able to make this whole cinematic universe. Despite what George R.R. Martin says, the world of Ice and Fire is not more interesting than the mainline Song of Ice and Fire series. So what we're going to see is, even if the show is incredibly successful, even if the show nails it, even if the show becomes peak of Game of Thrones from the rest of its run, from episode 3 all the way to the end, in reality, it's not going to save HBO Max, and we might see some huge shakeups with this streaming service and with a lot of IPs that are attached to Warner Brothers that we didn't think were going to be obliterated so soon. You've heard about the cancellations, but there's also TV cancellations. There's also pulling of old HBO shows off the streaming service, which is going to alienate a lot of people. And the reason why this is happening is because if you look at HBO Max's rankings for their shows, number 1 is Euphoria, which is an original show, and that's great. But number 2 is Friends. So just like all these other streaming services, the original content, the cheaper content to have on your service is not bringing people in. What's actually bringing people in are well-known IPs of other shows that you have to pay through the nose for. And if this continues, this trend on streaming, only the people with the largest backlog are going to be successful. And that's where things kind of get tragic, because no matter how this show performs, unless it goes far beyond anything that's ever existed in the streaming television space ever, which it's definitely not, it doesn't have the hype of even Stranger Things Season 1, it's not going to succeed according to the metrics based on the fact that we're in the middle of the streaming wars. So now we have to treat everything not only based on its quality, but based on its ability to reel in subscribers and make them continuous subscribers for month after month after month. And that's just too much pressure for any IP to bear. The golden age of streaming is over, and the streaming wars kind of suck because all we're seeing is casualty after casualty after casualty. The only people who are going to be successful during the course of these wars are actually going to be the people who are licensing out their content to other streaming services, because they get all the profit without bearing any of the costs of running their own streaming service. On top of that, people with large backlogs are probably going to do well, but we've seen Netflix, which is known for its huge backlog of content, struggle, and we've seen Disney Plus, even though it's roping in everything, they're dropping a lot of money on their shows, and I don't know if they're actually going to be able to do it with their streaming service. I think everybody eventually long term is going to take a lot of losses in this war, and that means you specifically, the consumer, because you have to get like 27 different streaming services in order to watch all the popular shows and stay aware and stay alert. It's not like there's something called piracy that you could do in order to view the content, and I'm definitely not encouraging that. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social media, support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about House of the Dragon and the struggles of HBO Max, all in one video. So genius, so stunning, so brave. Till next time.